Washington. As we close out this week, where do we go from here? Will Democrats succeed in making a case against President Trump? Will the president be able to mount an effective defense? And most importantly, how will the American people, the voters, process all of this? For more on that part of the story as we head into the weekend, which will become much more important, I'm joined by Nathaniel Rakich with our partners at 538. He joins us from New York. Also joined by Rachel Scott, our political reporter who covers the Trump campaign here in Washington. Also in Seattle, Skyping in with us is Zareen Shaw. She's out there on the campaign trail, been talking to voters. Hey, Zareen, we're going to get to you in a second. But Nathaniel, I want to start with you because for the big picture here, for the past several months, years in fact, impeachment has totally been a non-starter for most Americans. Polls have consistently showed that. But now we're starting to see some signs that could be beginning to change, right?
Yeah, we are. So before this whole episode, the average of impeachment polls showed that 39% of Americans supported impeachment, but 56% opposed it. But now, in the wake of all of these allegations, we've seen 4 polls now that have shown support for impeachment increased by even just a little bit since the last time that they polled about this, which was usually around the time that Mueller did his hearing. And in one particularly notable poll, a Morning Consult poll, they actually polled over the weekend where they found that support for impeachment hadn't changed very much. But after Pelosi came out in favor of impeachment, their most recent poll conducted this week found that support was 50-50, or actually more precisely, it was 43% to 43%.
Yeah, and we were just showing our viewers the Marist NPR poll, which came out this week as well, has support at 49%. That's significant, a significant jump, I think 13 points from earlier this year, just in the past few days. Of course, the public's still digesting this. Take a look by party, though. This is a key metric as we hear so many Democrats, top Democrats, talk about the importance of getting independents on board. Well, in this poll, the Marist poll, one early snapshot here, 44% of independents say they support impeachment at this time. But more generally, broadly, the conduct of the president at the center of all this, an interesting feeling on that one in this latest poll. 54%, about half the country, according to Marist, thinks that the president's request of Ukraine to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden, is actually a serious matter, should be investigated. That is kind of the most compelling number here to me, Nathaniel, that at least people think this should proceed.
Right. So an important thing to note about the Marist poll is that it asked about support for an impeachment inquiry, which, of course, isn't the same thing as saying the president should be impeached and should be removed. So I think that's why you're seeing maybe a little higher numbers than average on that Marist poll. But yeah, so a big question about this is whether wrongdoing equals impeachment. So we also saw a HuffPost YouGov poll this week that said 52% to 23% Americans think that it was inappropriate for Trump to ask Zelensky to investigate Biden, but they said only 39 to 38%, so essentially tied, that it was actually an impeachable offense.
Zareen Shaw, you've been out in Seattle talking to some voters on the campaign trail about this. There still seems to be a bit of a divide, at least anecdotally out there. Let's play a little bit of what you've been hearing.
No, it's changed my view. I thought before that they didn't really have enough grounds to impeach, but I think with all the reports coming out now where they've tried to hide the transcripts and he's, tried to strong-arm a foreign leader to investigate Joe Biden and his son in order to gain politically, I think it shows corruption and what a con man he is.
I don't believe it's an impeachable offense at this point. I think they're just grasping at straws at this point, trying to distract as much as possible.
So how that needle is threaded by Democrats, Serene, is really going to make a key difference here. And there are skeptics still out there that this is enough for impeachment.
Yeah, Devin, there really are. So I just spoke to a few people here in Seattle. You heard, of course, the lady that Johnny spoke to over in Las Vegas. And the reviews are just really mixed. Some people feel like this turns the needle for them. Other people say that their minds are not changed yet. Really, this is just a microcosm of our country and just how divided we are right now. Now, I did catch up with one guy from Ukraine here. He grew up there. He says people in Ukraine are not actually happy with how this is playing out. Take a listen to what he says A little bit of an outsider's opinion, of course, but he doesn't think that Trump is going anywhere.
People in Ukraine, they're like kind of mad because, well, we were expecting funds to support our country, to support our military and our economy, and Trump says that if you're not going to investigate this Biden son, we're not going to give you money. So people are kind of mad about this and upset.
What do you think is going to happen?
Honestly, I don't think that it's possible to impeach Trump at this point.
And he's right on that point, Zareen, at least likely right in terms of removing the president, although the impeachment vote in the House is certainly something. Our reporter, Johnny Verhoeven, as Zareen alluded to there, was talking to voters down in Nevada, in the casinos in Nevada, as they were playing the slots to get their sense of how this is playing out. Here's a little bit of what Johnny heard.
I guess my main question about that would be what the process is. You know, how are they going to go about being fair, but getting the truth out of this White House?
Big question, Rachel Scott. You cover the White House, cover the president. Voters trying to figure out, they want, this gentleman was telling Johnny Verhoeven, they want the information, they want to learn more before they make up their mind. But they're not quite sure they're going to get much more from this White House because stonewalling has been so much of the strategy against Democrats so far.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the strategy seems to be all over the place when it comes to the White House and when it comes to the Trump campaign. Their message has not changed since the Mueller investigation, right? They're still calling this a witch hunt. They still say that Democrats are out to defraud the American public. But they're trying to figure out how to respond to the whistleblower complaint itself and the fact that the Inspector General and the acting DNI deem that whistleblower credible. Even though the
they don't have a good
initially
answer for the substance in there. They aren't even disputing some of the facts that have come out in this.
Exactly. And Laura Trump did her first interview earlier today. She's an advisor to the president's campaign, also, you know, the president's daughter-in-law. And she said, hey, listen, well, no one's saying that we shouldn't take this seriously, but the president is saying that we shouldn't take this seriously. He's been on a tweet storm, taking aim at the whistleblower's credibility. Again, even though the Inspector General deemed that complaint of urgent concern and deemed the whistleblower credible.
It certainly did yesterday. It was a big moment in the spotlight. And Nathaniel, there's political risk on both sides of this, what is really a partisan battle that will play out in the next few weeks in the court of public opinion. What do Democrats need to do you think, to make sure this doesn't backfire on them headed into the election?
Yeah, well, I think that, frankly, what both parties need to do is stay united if they want to win this. I think the polling is showing us that a lot of the reason that impeachment wasn't popular before was that the Democratic Party was divided. And the reason that support is increasing is mostly due to Democrats coming in line because, of course, Nancy Pelosi, being the leader of the party until a 2020 presidential candidate is chosen, supports it now. But same is true with Republicans. So far, you haven't seen a lot of movement. They already really hated the idea of impeachment, and they still do. But if maybe some congressional leaders come off the fence, or Republican, even moderate Republicans in Congress, that could maybe influence Republican voters to support impeachment the same way that Democratic Congresspeople have influenced Democratic voters.
Smart take, as always, from Nathaniel Rakich, our friends at 538. Nathaniel, thanks so much for coming on today. Have a great weekend, sir. And our thanks to Rachel Scott, our White House correspondent. She'll be on the road this weekend, out on the campaign trail. Thank you so much, Rachel. I want to bring in now our senior Justice Department producer, Jack Date, who's here as well, to talk a little bit more about where we go from here in this impeachment battle. Also bring in our White House and Hill reporter, investigative guru, Ben Siegel. He's over at the White House for some more on that front in this conversation. Ben, I want to start with you because we learned today that Democrats want to expedite this process. They have left town for for recess, but they want to have hearings as soon as next week and possibly hold a vote on impeachment by Thanksgiving.
Devin, Democrats want to strike while the iron is hot. They think they have momentum after that remarkable, historic hearing yesterday with the acting director of national intelligence. In fact, most members are going home for these 2 weeks. Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, he is not one of them. He told reporters today after votes that they plan to work on potential hearings, potential depositions, and subpoenas. They are working on their agenda right now as we speak at the Capitol. Members of that committee, some of whom are going on congressional delegation trips out of the country. Some are returning home. They've been put on notice that they might be needed back in Washington for Intelligence Committee impeachment hearings as early as next week. So this is all part of their plan to get this done as quickly as possible. And I spoke to a senior Democratic aide today. They want to do this right, but they also don't want to drag this out. This aide said that in their mind, slow is steady and steady is fast, which is all basically saying they can do this carefully and quickly. They think it's the right way to do this, keep this out of the courts, and potentially, as you said, wrap this up by the end of the year.
And that would be amazing speed if they get an impeachment vote by Thanksgiving. So certainly keeping an eye on that, Jack. And we heard from the House Speaker today, Nancy Pelosi. She gave an interview where she sort of tipped her hand a little bit about how Democrats hope to keep the focus of their case very narrow as they head into this. Let's listen to her.
We weigh the equities. I never thought he was worth it to have something so divisive to the country. But really, the step that the cavalier attitude, or the irresponsible, whatever, illegal practically. But the fact is that we're talking about our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, checks and balances. This is a very important moment for us because I don't trust what could happen in the courts of his appointees as to whether they will rule and say that the Congress of the United States does have the right of oversight in the Constitution, oversight of the executive branch. The president says, Article 2 says, I can do whatever I want. No, it doesn't. You're not a monarch. It's a Republican, if we can keep it. A republic, if we can keep it.
Jack Date, it sounds there, and in other comments that the Speaker has made, that Democrats plan to zero in on the conduct of the president in this phone call, not so much the cover-up, which is also part of the story.
Right. You know, that old Washington saying, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. In this case, it's the crime. And they have so much to deal with on that alone. If there's other sort of problems that come from that, like a cover-up or things like that emerge, those are all less important than the central problem that they're examining right now.
And it's laid out so clearly in both the whistleblower's complaint and in the rough transcript the president released, and it's even drawing some criticism from Republicans who say quite publicly that the conduct laid out here is not good.
I mean, he's looking for a lifeline, but Republicans are having a hard time sort of committing to that right now at this early point in time on that substance.
Yeah, and Ben, do we expect the committees, you talk about this being expedited with the goal of Thanksgiving, do we expect the committees to try to subpoena a lot of witnesses, get a lot of documents? Are they bracing for big court fights? Because we know the White House hasn't played nice on those requests in the past.
I think they're trying to figure out how long they want to make that process go and how much they want to draw that out. Of course, they have said they need to go out there and they have to corroborate what was in this complaint to the best of their abilities. This White House has refused to really cooperate with any congressional oversight efforts since the start of this year. But Adam Schiff said today that any White House stonewalling only feeds into their case of obstruction. So I think when you talk to members on these committees and other people who are sort of involved in the planning of this, they know they have to try to do the best they can under these circumstances, but they're wary of getting stuck in the courts, which is why you might see them try to make this effort, try to subpoena people who aren't willing to cooperate with the committee, but maybe only take that as far as it goes the next few weeks to get this, to get the articles of impeachment to the Judiciary Committee and potentially out of the Judiciary Committee ready for the full vote on the House floor by the holiday season.
And the articles of impeachment, Jack, are the actual document that will lay out basically the charging case against President Trump in simple language of why the Democrats think he needs to be impeached.
It'll basically be the indictment by the House if they get to that point. The House Judiciary Committee will create these articles eventually if they're able to get that far with this inquiry. If they can get that far.
You know, I want to ask you before we let you go, Jack, where's the Justice Department in all of this? Everybody may remember from the Russia probe that Attorney General Jeff Sessions was recused. There was a huge fight. We talk about Rod Rosenstein overseeing the investigation. We have heard nothing this week from Attorney General Barr, aside from his reference in the complaint, in the phone call with the Ukrainian president. Where are they in this?
Well, they're in a really sticky position because they're central to the alleged conduct, which is, hey, Bill Barr is going to go and talk to authorities overseas to help interfere in the campaign, which he says never happened, and they never talked about it. And so, but they're stuck with this now. They're in the middle of it. The president put them in the middle of it, and how they get out of it is going to be tricky.
And the whistleblower, Jack, I mean, this is somebody that we have started to learn a little bit more about, an intelligence official, still anonymous. We don't know where in the government this person works. Will we hear from this person, do you think?
I think we will eventually hear from this person. That's all still being worked out. But clearly, the broader story in the context of it will come out, I think.
All right. And Ben Siegel, before we let you go and go into the weekend here, the president never goes into a Friday night quietly. What are we expecting for the president later today and into the weekend? What should we look out for?
Well, we've had a number of turbulent, tumultuous moments in this White House over the past 2 years. When crisis or controversy within the administration sort of erupts even beyond the work week, and when that usually happens, the president is here or he's in one of his retreats, be it Mar-a-Lago in Florida or Bedminster in New Jersey, and he tends to sit and fume. And we tend to get a pretty good look into what he's thinking about the current situation from his Twitter feed. So it's a safe bet that if you take a look at that feed this weekend when he is expected to remain in town, there's no travel planned, we could get a better sense of how he's taking this. And as we've seen from the last couple days, he is lashing out at Democrats right now.
Yeah, he sure has been. Also trying to come up with a strategy, build a team to respond to this. They were caught a little flat-footed this week, it seems. Ben Siegel, thank you so much for your reporting. Ben, Jack Date, always great to see you. Great job this week. Thank you, sir. Moving on here in Washington, there was actually other news this week besides impeachment, although it was hard to digest it with all the big headlines popping here around town. One of them involved the White House effort to crack down on immigration to the United States. Quietly this week, as this firestorm was unfolding on Capitol Hill, the White House announced a cap on refugees that will be the lowest in decades. One international advocate calls it an unspeakable move. Today, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Director Ken Cuccinelli, an immigration hardliner, explained why the White House is shutting the door to refugees.
We still have a crisis at the southern border that all of these same people that we're talking about, asylum officers and refugee officers, are doing credible fear interviews, they're doing reasonable fear interviews, they're doing what are called CAT, Convention Against Torture interviews. Those are the people that do this. And the workload, as you all know, at the southern border has been immense in the last couple of years, and yet we are still getting to tens of thousands of asylum cases with grants put in place along with the refugees, and those people are being resettled.
All right, Quinn Owen is here. He's our immigration reporter, been on the story for quite a while. Quinn, we heard Ken Cuccinelli talk about the southern border. We're talking about refugees, but he's basically making the case that the administration is so focused on the situation at the border that they can't process anybody else.
Right. So a bit of a distinction between asylees and refugees. Asylees are people who are in the United States, make it to the border. Refugees
so
are folks in other places, exactly. He's saying that the combined effect is just too taxing. That's why they have to implement this drastic cut. Another political element of this, though, they're really fundamentally changing the way that the cap is subdivided. Instead of just doing it by geography, they've carved out specific exemptions for people who face religious persecution, a specific quota for people, refugees impacted by the Iraq War, and even a very small token for folks from Northern Triangle countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador.
And you're seeing some of the new guidelines here on the screen as Quinn is explaining here, and you're looking at these bullet points, the White House carving out these special categories in a much smaller pool of people. And what surprises me, Quinn, is that refugees, these people applying to come to the United States as a place of safe haven at a time of crisis, are vetted. Refugees are vetted in advance. It's a rigorous process. They are interviewed. They have to be placed with an agency or a family. You see here the number of refugees the U.S. has taken in over the past few years, dwindling sharply. much different from an asylum seeker who could be anybody or everybody who just shows up.
Right.
And you would think that this administration, given their criticism of security concerns and the like, would want more refugees.
Well, and refugees are vetted now more than ever. You'll remember Trump's executive order on extreme vetting impacts the very people who are applying for legal status before they arrive in the U.S. That's something we've reported on in the past. Of course, Obama took some flack for not accepting as many refugees as critics thought that he could, although towards the end of his administration, he attempted to bump that number up. Trump has brought that right back down.
And I think we have a snapshot for those sort of trying to put their mind around what a refugee is, where these people are from. Who are refugees? There's a lot of them around the world. Some 26 million refugees, according to the United Nations. 2/3 of those come from just a handful of countries. Syria, of course, war-torn for years. Afghanistan, South Sudan, Myanmar, Somalia. These are dangerous places, very impoverished places. But the wars in those places have sent people fleeing, and as the definition says, you've been talking about this, Quinn, but these are people who basically have no choice. They have to get out, and they don't have any place to go.
Right, and if we're talking about the global trend of refugee resettlement, it's interesting to see when the Trump administration first started slashing refugee admissions in 2017, some of the major other world powers that do refugee resettlement followed suit. We saw declines from Canada and the United Kingdom, while the number of refugees getting into the processing system was actually increasing.
And is there anything Congress can do about this, or is this solely at the discretion of the administration?
Technically, this is a proposal from the administration that gets submitted to Congress, but it's more of a formality, and ultimately the president does have broad authority to determine who is allowed to be accepted into the country.
Okay, refugee policy changing quietly this week as we were focused on other news. Quinn, thanks for bringing it to us. Have a good weekend, sir.
Thank you.
Finally today, a powerful image of hope, something I think all of us could use this week after the news we've been facing. 22 years after Princess Diana took that poignant walk through a minefield in Angola in southern Africa. Today, her son, Prince Harry, put on the same shield and body armor that she was wearing. There he is in blue, retracing her steps to highlight her legacy. Harry now declaring that same area is safe and saying this about his mother.
To walk in her footsteps is clearly quite emotional for me, but I think as much as she did then, there is still so much to do. But without question, if she hadn't have campaigned the way that she did 22 years ago, this could arguably still be a minefield. So yeah, I'm incredibly proud of what she's been able to do, and meet these kids here who were born on this street, who actually didn't even know that this was a minefield. I think it's great. We've had an opportunity to meet so many people from all sorts of different backgrounds, and though I can't speak Portuguese, this part of the trip has been absolutely amazing, and be able to visit places that I haven't visited before, but also focus on some really important issues. I think it's been great.
Diana, of course, putting the spotlight on that global effort to ban and clear landmines from war zones, a legacy which continues. And our Elizabeth McLaughlin, who covers the Pentagon and military issues for us, landmine issues is something that you've been tracking. She started this. Harry was shining the spotlight on it today, but really there's been a lot of progress made on this front.
I honestly, Devin, I think we forget just how important that moment was to see Princess Diana, a princess, walking in pants in that body armor through what was a dangerous land minefield in Angola. Today, that's a much safer country. And there's been so much progress that has happened in the last 22 years since Diana made that walk. There has been an international ban that was instituted just 2 years after she was there. 164 countries have signed on. More than 48 million stockpiled mines have been destroyed, and 31 countries have been completely cleared of mines. So there's been a lot of progress. That's not to say that it is safe everywhere. Something that Prince Harry highlighted when he was in Angola was that more than 60 million people still have fear and a risk, are in danger of these landmines, especially in places like Yemen, Afghanistan, in Syria, Ukraine. So there's still a lot of progress to be made, but I think what Harry's doing here is trying to continue his mother's legacy.
Yeah, a success story, really, and a success story not only for those on the ground doing the removal work, but highlighting the importance a little celebrity can actually do can go a long way to put the power of the royals behind this initiative, to see that image, as you say, so iconic. And Yemen, though, still the front lines of this fight.
Absolutely. A lot of progress to be made, but like you just said, after Diana was there, in Angola, they made huge progress. They still have a little bit more to go. They're trying to be completely mine-free by 2025, so it is a slow process. Angola was in and out of civil war for over 2 decades, so you have to remember this is a very slow process. It's very dangerous, and there are even U.S. forces who do landmine removal in places like Syria.
They sure do. A lot of dogs do as well. We've had them here in the briefing room from the Marshall Legacy Institute. Our photog Pat O'Gara bringing us that story as well, a good one. Thank you for bringing us that good news story here at the end of this very tumultuous week in Washington. Great to have you with us here on ABC News Live all week long. We will have continuing coverage of the impeachment effort against President Trump next week. Join us here every day, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time in the briefing room on ABC News Live. Also download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. You can also watch all of our live coverage there at the push of a button. It is free at any time, 24/7. I'm Devin Dwyer. Have a great weekend. See you next week.